We're going to pick up right where we left off the other day. Let me adjust something here as the screen is off just a little because it's frozen. There is an assignment, 10 things on your study guide. The Chapter 16 study guide was just put in this morning, so you should all have access to it. But we're going to go back to POW camps. And then we're going to talk about medicine in the Civil War, specifically one aspect of medicine in the Civil War, which is kind of ghoulish and creepy and weird and gross all at the same time. But it's interesting because what we're starting to see in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, is leaps and bounds of changes when it comes to medicine. We're talking about a time when they don't understand things that you can't see. So viruses and germs don't exist to them. But obviously they do to us. So when they treat things, they don't always understand why the outcome is what it is. Whereas today, if I scrape my hand, I know I have to wash it. If I get an owie, I have to scrub it with soap or it's going to get an infection. It's going to get worse. So even the little sting of soap and a owie, it's going to be better for you in the long run because you've got to get the germs and the bacteria and the viruses out. So scientists and doctors didn't have the ability to explain things that they couldn't see. It's kind of difficult even for us to understand viruses and things that are so microscopic that they're in the air around us and we don't even know we're being exposed to them. The reason we wore masks for a year and a half, fortunately in school only for a year, was because of that. If coronaviruses were bright pink and we could see them floating in the air, we could probably avoid them as much as possible. If I knew Grace had coronavirus because there's this cloud of bright pink virus around her, then I just stay away out of the cloud of bright pink virus, and then when she sneezes, it shoots at me, and I'm like, whoa, dodging it like a ninja. Yes, Victor, I have ninja skills. I just don't show you very often. I don't want to scare anybody with my mad ninja skills. Throat punches and stuff like that. Anyway, so we're going to take a look at that today, Civil War medicine, some of the tools they used, some of the repercussions of new technology in warfare, the changes in the way we fight or the changes in the ammunition that's used, change what battlefields look like, change the outcome of battles as far as the number of men that are wounded and the types of wounds that have to be dealt with. So we're picking right up where we left off. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, and it's kind of interesting stuff. Pretty easy day for you as far as notes go. Now, someone remind me while we're getting ready to go back into POW camps, without looking back in your notes, and I know some of you already have to refresh yourself, what was the name of the notorious prisoner of war camp located in the Confederacy that was cause for tens of thousands of deaths? Yes, Christian.
Andersonville.
Thank you, Andersonville. And it was pretty gross because we saw starvation. We talked about excrement, urine, and feces all over the ground. And we took a look at some pictures of some of the men that were survivors, if you can call that surviving. And what more modern event did we compare those people to? The men that came out of Andersonville and weren't dead. What do they look like? Or who do they look like? Yes, they look like Christian, kind of. They look like skeletons, but what event do we more commonly think of when we see people that look like that? The Holocaust. And I know that many of you don't have a whole lot of background in the Holocaust, but you're exactly right. So that's where we're picking up. But it's not really fair either that we put these images solely squarely on the Confederates with Camp Anderson or Andersonville, because this was common everywhere. It doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't take a rocket scientist or a rocket surgeon to figure out, I have Confederate prisoners, you have Union prisoners, let's just trade. I want my men back, you want your men back. But instead, both sides were guilty of doing this. We looked at Charles Nickerson, you know, the guy that that got out of it and got on a steamboat, and then his steamboat blew up and he died. And history's just full of tragedy, more so than it is the stories of success and awesomeness we don't hear about near as frequently. So anyway, here's some other prisoner of war camps. So it's not just Andersonville, but history books would lead you to believe that it's just Andersonville. The Union, Alton, Illinois, Camp Chase, Camp Douglas. We're going to spend some time on Camp Douglas because it is freaky bad, probably worse than Andersonville. Elmira, Fort Delaware, Fort McHenry. This Fort McHenry, that's where the Star Spangled Banner was written in the War of 1812. Rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in air. Morton. So we got all of these. And then other ones in the Confederacy. Belle Isle was also a horrible place. But most camps in Virginia were in Richmond. And this isn't a complete list. So there were others also. So instead of just trading prisoners, they captured men and they treated them harshly. And you can, to a certain extent, understand the reason for their harsh treatment, as Confederate soldiers were near starvation also. There wasn't much of a way to take care of them. If you can't feed your own troops, you going to feed your prisoners? Probably not. My number one priority is making sure my family eats. After I make sure my family's fed, then I might worry about whether or not you have enough to eat. But right now, I'm not worried about you until I make sure my family has all of their needs. And then you're second. Grace, I'm not going to worry about you. My kids are first. And then if there's an extra apple, I'll give it to you. The Christian will fight you for it. Because look how scrawny he is. He needs to eat some apples, or maybe more likely some protein. Christian, meat is good. Milk. Not Jolly Ranchers. He's angry today. What did you say to him, Jaden?
I said he was an idiot.
That's not nice.
But was I right?
So let's take a look at some of the rules in a Confederate POW camp. If you're working on your study guide, let's make sure you're focused also on what's going on. You'll have some time at the end of class to work on your study guide, I promise. So put it away for a while, and I'll give you some time at the end. Because I am recording this video because I'm going to be gone this afternoon for a meeting. So we'll be around the 50-minute mark instead of the 70-minute mark. At least that's my goal. And you can give me a 10-minute warning if you'd like to. So I'll start shutting things down if I haven't already. But roll call. What is roll call? Anybody know what that means? It's a military term. It's attendance. We did it just a little bit ago. Normally in roll call, I'd list everybody's name off instead of just saying, hey, who's missing today? But that would take an extra 3 minutes of my life, and I don't want to do that. But roll call, you're expected to line up on the parade grounds or in Andersonville in lines at camp at 7 a.m. and at 5 p.m. What's the purpose of roll call in the military or in a prisoner of war camp? Yeah, make sure nobody's escaped or dead. Because if they don't answer the roll call, we got to find them. That means they've either died or escaped. No letters, packages, or parcels can come in without being inspected first. So, interestingly enough, even at horrifying places like Andersonville, you could correspond. You could send letters to your family. But they're inspected first. So all of your letters had to be sort of somewhere along the lines of, Dear Mother, I'm being held prisoner at Andersonville Prisoner of War Camp in Georgia. I am being treated well. There is plenty of food. There are no reasons to worry about me. Love, your son, Mr. Bellamy. Is that true? No, but because it's being inspected, that's what it's got to say. If you put, this place is horrible, everybody's dying, and everybody's got dysentery, severe bloody diarrhea, cha-cha-cha, that letter's not going to go through because nobody wants, at Andersonville, nobody wants the outside world to know how bad it is on the inside. Then, when your mom sends you back a note, dear Silas, I'm so glad that you're safe and okay. I'm sending some of your favorite homemade pretzels in a Ziploc bag. They didn't have Ziplocs. I'm packaging up some homemade pretzels. Hopefully by the time they get to you, they're still good. Love, your mom, Carol. That's what letter would come back. But the problem is by the time you got the package, what has happened to it? Because the guards that are inspecting the packages are hungry just like the prisoners. So what happens to Silas's pretzels or his cookies? They're gone. So, but at least you had some correspondence. At least you could let your mama know that you were alive. Russian soldiers that are getting captured in Ukraine that are scared. At least this is the propaganda that we're seeing. It may or may not be true news. They're sending letters home to they're getting to the Ukrainians and they're asking, could I use your cell phone? They're calling their moms because they're worried about their mothers, knowing that their mothers don't know if they're alive or dead. And they're doing the same thing. They're like, Mom, I'm alive. It's horrible. We've been sent to a place we don't even know why we're here. And so those types of communications are super important in the military. Imagine being the mother or the father of a child that's off fighting in a war and not knowing where they're at any given time. It'd be pretty scary. Not allowed to converse with the guards. What's converse mean? Can't talk with the guards. Firing of one gun at night or two during the day would signal assembly of the guard. So it's like a warning shot. No conversations or relations or trading with prisoners of any kind. That one was kind of a loose rule because I know there was trading that took place. So, in fact, it was very common to pool their supplies so that they could actually make a meal out of them. 9 o'clock lights are out except in the hospital and officers' quarters. So a very strict set of rules that you had to follow. Some of you are like, this kind of sounds like my house. Lights out. Why? You've had enough electricity for the day. Mom ever say that? She might, as the price of electricity goes up. It'd be like that. How about some punishments? Death by shooting or bayonet for relieving yourselves outside of a latrine. Relieving yourselves means peeing or pooping. You get shot or stabbed. This is, the girls are like, well, duh, why would you do? But for the boys, the whole world is our outhouse. That's the thing it's the only benefit of being a man is that we can pee wherever we want to pee without any issue at all. Except in public, you're not supposed to do that. But if you're out walking in the woods and you got to take a whiz, you just do it. It's like, oh yeah, easy. Girls can do it too, but it's a little bit more of an issue. So yeah, you can't do that. How about this? Sitting in the snow with no pants or underwear for a day. This is a punishment. So if you've done something wrong, this is what can happen. The mule or the horse is a long board that you're straddling for hours, sometimes with buckets of sand tied to your feet. They actually have one of these, for those of you that have been to Fort Atkinson, they actually have one of these that was used as a punishment, except instead of hanging it 15 feet in the air, it's like this tall, like 4 feet tall maybe. And it's a wedge of wood. It's like sitting on a horse or a mule, except it's pointed at the top. So if you just climbed on it and sat there for a minute, it wouldn't bother you at all because you can squeeze your cheeks together. You can tighten your muscles in your groin area so that it doesn't cause you any pain. But if you're sitting on it with buckets of sand tied to your feet, it's pulling you down on that. How long can you keep those muscles tightened before they have to relax? Maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then after that, it just starts pulling down and causing pain and bruising, and it would be horrifyingly painful. So these are tortures. They're not so much punishments as they are tortures. Sit on them until you pass out and fall off 15 feet in the air. So falling from 15 feet in the air, you're probably going to break something. And this could be randomly used if a prisoner displeased a guard or an officer. So you didn't even have to do anything necessarily bad to get this punishment. Should we get one here and try it? Kate has already volunteered to be our first guinea pig if we put one up in this class. Right, Kate? But so far nobody's said we should do it or not. I think we should. No? But it's Kate. You don't want to... David?
What if it was Kate's night?
Me? Why would I need punished? You have to do bad stuff to get punished. What did you do? You have a brother. 2 of them. That's reason enough. What about if we did it to Kylie?
She doesn't know where her friends are. She's a fake friend. You should do it to her.
You have a fake friend?
Yes.
I do too.
She didn't know where she was.
She can't keep track of her siblings or friends.
Neither can you. And she wears
I
socks.
can keep track of
You
her.
can keep track of your life. She wears ankle socks.
You got to keep your feet warm.
Well, you wear tall socks. You don't wear ankle socks.
I don't have any tall socks.
Why? You should get
Because they're tall socks are for old men. If I wore those socks you have on, that'd look like an old man.
No.
Why do I want to look like an old man? I'm young.
Old mans are who are old.
Why is wearing tall socks?
Well, look at him. His mom makes him turn out the electricity at 9 o'clock. For crying out loud. There's some weird things at play in his world. Anyway, look at that. Random shots fired into the barracks. So, gosh, you think about how scared you'd always be, not knowing when the next bullet's going to... How about this? Bending over without bending your knees for hours until blood would come from your nose or your eye sockets. Now just think about it. And you try it if you want to. Stand up and just bend over and just automatically feel the pressure. It's not a bad pressure, but as soon as I bend forward, I can automatically feel pressure coming to my head because the blood, and I can't bend over for it. Some of you guys can like fold in half, but you feel pressure because the blood is pooling in your head. So for hours of that, that'd be pretty horrible. I did see, there's a movie, an old favorite of mine called Missing in Action. It's a Chuck Norris movie. And Chuck Norris was a prisoner of war in a Vietnam prisoner of war camp, North Vietnamese POW camp. And they hung him upside down from a tree by his feet. And they tied his hands behind his back. And then they took a ticked off rat, stuck it in a burlap sack, and tied it around his head. So this mad rat was like chewing on his face and stuff. And you could see him, swirling around in the air. And pretty soon everything stopped. And the North Vietnamese are like, ah. And you saw this pool of blood coming out of this burlap sack. And you automatically assume that Chuck Norris was dead. But of course it's Chuck Norris, so he's not dead. Instead, they pull the hood off of him and he's got the rat in his teeth. Yeah. Anyway, so punishments in POW camps can be pretty extreme. Watch the movie Unbroken and see what the Japanese did to that man. It's extreme. Torture, starvation, work, exhaustion. Maybe one of the worst punishments or tortures is not allowing sleep for days on end. You literally lose your marbles. You go crazy. Some of us aren't good sleepers, but we at least can rest. So imagine if you're in a room and the lights are super bright and there's blaring music playing and you try to fall asleep and they kick you. So there are more modern versions of this. Solitary confinement, 20 men squeezed into a 10 square foot room. I don't know if I really believe that. 10 square feet is 5 feet by 2 feet. I don't think you can squeeze 20 men into that. So I think that's a typo or a misinterpretation of something. 20 people, maybe 10, with a 10-inch window. Whipping, standing barefoot in the snow for hours. Burr. Kylie could do it because she has socks on with her sandals. Ankle socks. What happened? I went the wrong way. This is Camp Douglas. So this is in Andersonville. This is near Chicago, Illinois. High mortality rates can be attributed to several factors: overcrowding, unhealthy living conditions, ineffective medical treatment, inadequate food, brutality. The war lasted longer than they thought. Nobody thought it was going to last for 4 years, resulting in more prisoners than they anticipated. By 1862, there were almost 9,000 prisoners in camp with fewer than 900 guards. Over 200 prisoners were crowded into barracks, averaging 70 feet by 25 feet. As the number increased, tents were erected to house them with little protection against below zero winds. Okay, so Camp Douglas near Chicago, Illinois, would be similar-ish, except it's always windy in Chicago. It's usually windy here, but it's always windy there. Can you imagine sleeping in a canvas tent without adequate clothing or bedding in the winter in Blair, Nebraska? That's the conditions that they were living under at Camp Douglas. So the same type of conditions as Andersonville has, but Andersonville is in Georgia, where the climate is much more amenable to sleeping outside in a tent. We wouldn't fare very well sleeping in a tent outside. Now we might be able to do it with a nice sleeping bag because it's only getting down to 39 degrees. Most of us are too wimpy for that. You know, some of you love going tent camping. Any of you tent campers? Yeah, weirdo. My version of camping, if I'm going to go camping, is I want a travel trailer or a motor home that has a heater and an air conditioner and maybe possibly a television. I can do without the television, but if it's raining outside, I want something to do. So, yeah, that's my version of camping. Sleep. Well, I understand that, but sleeping on the rough ground with bugs crawling on me in the middle of the night in a tent does not sound interesting to me at all. Oh, that seems like glamping to me. An air mattress? Jeez.
But then it's not fun when you get kicked off the air mattress.
I don't even really like staying in a hotel. I'd rather stay in my own nice, comfy bed. I only have one tent camper out of this whole crew, though. That surprises me a little. Soft bunch of weaklings. What do you mean, me?
You just admitted that you were with us.
Whatever.
Yeah, you're a glamper.
So the only tough one in here is Jaden.
No.
She has an air mattress. Do you have one of those great big tents, like a room for your whole family type tent?
Yeah, and there's a little section, but then we haven't been in a while.
Like it has a bedroom?
No, like it's like from here to where Christian's at, and I'll
A divider to keep you away from Christian?
no, away from my family.
Oh.
But then the dog comes in, and then he died.
Oh, wow. And you don't bring him in anymore.
We were camping, but like
That was
a few years
a
out.
dramatic drop there.
Same thing, Camp Douglas. Huge latrines, toilets were left open so rain washed raw sewage into the drinking water. Wooden floors were removed to discourage tunneling, so vermin infested the dirt floors. Rats and mice were commonplace. Some unnamed inmates recalled catching gray rats, which were made into rat pie. Yummy. When cholera, that's poopy stuff, and smallpox epidemics erupted, free medicine sent by the South was withheld as contraband. So the South sent medicine for their people that were sick, and the North refused to give it. Food rations were restricted, partly due to costs and partly due to retaliation for Southern victories. So every time the South had success on the battlefield, the North punished their prisoners. An employee of the Sanitary Commission suggested only fire could cleanse the soil and the souls of this camp. So Camp Douglas might have been worse than Andersonville. So why is it, and this is a little bit difficult for you to understand, but if we had the textbooks and we were reading through this part of the textbook, why is it that only Andersonville gets mentioned and Camp Douglas is a side note in history that's only brought up in classes like this? Why is Andersonville the only one that gets mentioned? Why is Camp Douglas, if it was worse than Andersonville, why is it not the example that's used of prisoner of war camps during the Civil War? Who wins the war? The North. From whose perspective do we almost always learn history? The winner's perspective. So we're not going to study how awful the North was. We would identify ourselves with the North, partly because we're in Nebraska and partly because most of us see past the idea of slavery. It was a horrible idea, a bad thing to do, and most of us would never admit to thinking it's a good idea. So, of course, we're going to identify ourselves as Northerners. And admitting our faults or our weaknesses in history is not an easy thing to do. So looking at this and saying, whoa, both sides were guilty, not everyone wants to do that. Just like not everyone wants to admit they would eat a rat pie. But if you looked like those images of those men that I showed you from Andersonville, would you eat a rat pie? Heck yes. Anything. I'd eat bugs. You know, I've watched enough episodes of Naked and Afraid to know that whatever comes across my path, if I've been starving for 14 days or 20 days or however long it is, I'm going to eat it. I don't care if it's a bug or a snake or a fish. I'll trap those mosquitoes that are buzzing around my head and stuff them in my pie hole because I like food. Whatever protein I can get, I'm going to eat. Prisoners were deprived of clothing to discourage escapes. Many wore sacks with head and armholes cut out. A few had underpants. Blankets to offset the bitter northern winter were confiscated from the few that had them, and the weakest froze to death. The Chicago winter of 1864 was devastating. They lost 1,091 men in 4 months. That was the heaviest and for any prisoner of war camps, and equal to the death, the highest rate of Andersonville from February to May of 1864. Yet it is Andersonville that we remember. There are 6,000 Confederate soldiers buried in one mass grave on 1 acre of land north of Chicago. Southerners erected a monument for those who died. The death rate was higher than Andersonville. But it's Andersonville that we remember. It's Andersonville that the history books talk about. Yet Camp Douglas was worse. So it wasn't like in World War II, for instance, where we treated German prisoners of war with dignity and respect for the most part, and Americans captured by the Germans usually weren't treated near as well. It wasn't like that, where we can take the moral high ground and say we were much better to the prisoners. Is that always the case? I don't know. I don't witness it. Would we know if America was mistreating prisoners of war? Probably not. That's not something they would want us to know. Would we find out? I think so. It's pretty hard to hide things in this country. So let's take a look at some Civil War medicine. So we have some changes in technology that changed the necessity of getting better at medicine. Here's one of the biggest. Larger numbers of casualties. When we look at the number of casualties in the Civil War, it's extreme compared to every other event in American history, even World War II. The numbers in World War II surpassed the numbers in World War I, but the population of the United States was almost double, more than double, what it was during the Civil War. So that would be expected. But look at the change in bullets. If we go back to the American Revolution, people were firing a round spherical ball. The two most normal calibers, caliber just means the size of the gun, in the American Civil War were 50 caliber and 54 caliber. 50 caliber, a gun that shoots a 50 caliber projectile, this is very, very easy. It's 0.5 inches. So this round ball that's being fired out of a musket in the American Revolution and still used in the American Civil War is half of an inch wide. It's a lead ball this big. Now, we changed the shape of it into a cone, or we call it a mini ball, invented, I believe, in France, and it all of a sudden changes the way that bullet flies through the air. Which can be thrown farther, a dodgeball or a football? A football, because of the shape, it just flies nice and far. Now, what makes a football fly farther? Its ability to spin. Even this round ball could spin because we changed the technology inside the barrel of the musket. Now we have rifles. They're called rifles now instead of muskets because some guy, in all of his wisdom, and I don't know who it was, figured out that if you put a groove on the inside of a barrel that is twisting down the barrel, as that bullet leaves the barrel, it's going to be spinning. So it's the same type of idea if you throw a football and it has a nice tight spiral. Who's the quarterback in 8th grade? Colin, Diggy, Declan? When Declan throws a nice tight spiral, what's it look like flying through the air? It's a thing of beauty, like a bird. But if he gets hit while he's throwing and it's a duck, which means he hasn't got the time to put the right spiral on the ball, it goes flopping through the air. What happens to the distance and the speed with which it can reach its target. It's garbage, right? It's like, "Meh." That's kind of how I throw a ball. I'm definitely not quarterback style. So because of these new changes, when a bullet leaves the barrel, it's going to be much more accurate and it's going to go a much greater distance. So, snipers in the military today, because of the technology of weapons, can hit a target at over a mile away. There's a video, for a while I was into watching YouTube videos on the greatest snipers in history. And they've gotten better over time because of the technology of the rifles that they use. But there was this guy, don't do it now, but if you're bored sometime, YouTube him. I think his Halfcock, Carlos Halfcock. I believe he was considered to be the greatest sniper of Vietnam, American sniper. And he, most of the time, snipers go in pairs. So if Kelson is a sniper, I might be his spotter. So if he's crawling along the ground in camouflage, I'm crawling along right beside him or right behind him. And I carry a scope, binoculars. So if he shoots, I can watch what he's hit. So if it's a target a mile away and he misses by a foot, I can tell him what he needs to adjust on his gun. Halfcock didn't like to do that. He liked to go by himself because he would literally sneak across open fields and snipe targets at close range. And he knew that if he had someone with him, the chances of getting caught were much greater. But I believe, and I might be wrong on this, I hate saying things that I'm not 100% sure on, but I'll say 80% sure, that the record today is held by some Canadian sniper, and he shot a terrorist in Afghanistan like at, I'm going to make up the number, but it's a crazy, like 1.5 miles away. So think about how big does a person appear to be with your eyes at 1.5 miles away? Like almost non-seeable there. So a scope brings them up closer and makes them bigger, but not a lot. And think about in 1.5 miles distance as a bullet's flying through the air, you have to take into account, even if there's just a little breeze, what's it going to do to that bullet over 1.5 miles? It's going to move it. Well, this guy that broke the record, there were 3 different wind currents. So one going this way, one going this way, and the other going against it, pushing his bullet around. So he had to factor in the speed of the wind, the density of the air, so how much humidity is there, because the heavier the air, the less further that bullet's going to travel. And then when he shot, because the guy was so far away, he couldn't even see him in his scope because he knew the man was walking up a hill. So as he's walking, that bullet has to travel 1 mile, and it's going really fast, but as that bullet's traveling, if he shoots at where the guy is when he pulls the trigger, he's going to hit behind him somewhere. So he not only has to take into account that the bullet is going to lose height as it travels through the air, he also has to know that the man is walking. So if he's shooting at me, he's aiming somewhere up here because that bullet's going to go. So it's pretty cool, and I think there's actually video of it. But we see changes that are taking place in that kind of technology that makes soldiers much deadlier. I used to have examples of these bullets. I still do, but they're at home. And I told you the story one time. There was a substitute that tried to get me fired because he found one of these in my desk drawer. It's not a real bullet. It's called a sabot or a sabot. It's just, in fact, these were made of lead. This one was made of brass. It's just metal in that shape. It doesn't have any gunpowder with it, but this idiot didn't know that. He was a horrible substitute anyway. He showed up wearing sweatpants. This isn't PE class, dude. Anyway, he took it to Dr. Stogdill, and Dr. Stogdill called me in and said, "What is this?" I go, "It's a sabot or a sabot." "Why do you have it?" I go, "Because I like to show people the size." I have 250 caliber muzzle loaders at home, so they could have been this similar type of weapons used during the Civil War. Obviously can't bring them to school, but I could bring the bullets because there's no gunpowder. It can't explode. You can throw it on the ground and nothing happens. Nothing can happen. If I threw it at your eye, I might hurt your eye, but I could do that with a pencil too, and we don't ban pencils. Anyway, I wasn't in trouble. What Dr. Stogdill really wanted to know is where was it? And I told him it was in the back of one of my desk drawers. He goes, that's what I needed to know. So he wasn't after me. He knew the guy had to snoop through all my stuff. And that's probably not cool. So he was going through my stuff during his plan period. But anyway, we're shattering bones instead of breaking them. A broken bone, pretty easy to fix. A shattered bone, there's not too many options that we've got for repair. So this is the result. We see a lot of amputations. How about this? So this is just a cool. 2 bullets found fused together in a cornfield. Think about the chances of that happening. For them to fuse together means they had to be pointing exactly at each other, because if they're off just a little bit, instead of fusing together, what do you think those 2 bullets do? They glance off of each other. So if you think about it, and at least this is the way my brain puts this together, the 2 men that pulled the trigger on opposite sides of the battlefield were aiming at each other, exactly at each other. If one of them pulls the trigger a second earlier, what happens? The other guy's dead. So this is really cool. I suppose you don't see that very often, that bullets would fuse together. Look at this. Here's a bullet in a man's spinal column. If it doesn't break your spinal cord, you could live that way, but you would have extreme pain. I don't know if this is the guy or not, but you can see where a bullet has entered. Here you can see on this guy where the bullet has entered, and in the mirror where it exited right at his spine. So there are survivors, as long as it doesn't hit a major organ, as long as it doesn't hit any organs. If it hits an organ, a gut shot is almost always deadly, but if it misses everything, as long as you don't get an infection, you might survive. But infections were pretty common. Eye injuries. Look at this femur deformity. I don't know how that happens, but that's pretty weird. We have field hospitals all over the place during the Civil War. Usually, if it was near a battlefield, they would confiscate a home of a planter nearby, and they might use their carriage house or the house as a hospital itself. These men are either recovering or they're in what's called triage. So Civil War medicine really develops because they start to take a look at the individual and what their wound is, and they try to determine who's the most savable. So if I'm a nurse that's trained to do triage, because all the doctors are busy doing surgeries, and I walk up and I see David and he's been shot in the gut and there's a lot of blood, I'm going to give him something to keep him comfortable, but we're probably not going to save him. And then I walk up to Muck and she's been shot in the arm, and I can see that it probably hurts really badly, but it's an arm. Yeah, we got a little bit of time, so I'm going to wrap it up tight to stop the bleeding. I get to Kylie. She's been shot in the femur. That's this big bone here, your largest bone. And if we don't do something about that soon, it could kill her. So who do I take into surgery to the doctor first? Kylie. Because we can't save David. He's been gut shot. You're going to die, son. I'm like, we'll get to you soon. You're going to be just fine. And you've got some time. You're in a lot of pain, but you've got time. But we got to take care of Kylie. And then we'll get to Muck, and then we'll move maybe to David. But we'll probably just keep him comfortable. So they have systems now in place to take care of this. So amputation was the most common way to make a person most useful. So we could look at McKenna's arm. There's 2 things we could do. We could splint it, remove the bullet if we can, clean the wound as best we can, which, again, they don't know a whole lot about germs and bacteria and viruses. Or we can just remove the bullet and bandage her up and let her go, which probably renders this arm and her hand useless. So it's there, but it can't do anything. Or we can amputate at the elbow, removing it. Now she's got a nub instead of just a useless appendage hanging off. So amputation becomes the most common sort of surgery at the time. Why? Because when a bullet now hits its target, it flattens out like this. So when I shoot my muzzle loader, even though that musket ball is only a 1/2 inch around. It's only this big. I used to go deer hunting a lot. I don't anymore because I don't have time and I don't really want to clean a deer. But when I'd hit a deer with my musket, that half-inch ball, when it would enter the deer, it would make a half-inch hole. When it would exit the deer, it took with it chunks of bone, and because it's made out of lead or some sort of soft metal, that half-inch, as soon as it hits something, flattens out and becomes 3/4 of an inch. So when it blows out the other side of the deer, it's 3 times the size of a hole that it was. And that's why, when you look here, these things, when they hit a target, they flatten out like a mushroom because they're soft metals. So look at this guy. We'll come back to the picture of this guy in a little bit. Lost both his arms. What was the occupation of almost every person going into the Civil War? Farmers. How much usefulness does this guy have on the farm now? Probably not a lot. Not quite like today. Now you can see there are prosthetics. He's got fake arms here, so he's not totally helpless, but gonna need a little help. Here's a doctor's set of tools. There is a misconception during the American Civil War that anesthesia wasn't available. That's not true. It was. Both the Union and Confederacy, for probably 3/4 or more of the surgeries that they did, used ether or a similar anesthesia. Ether, believe it or not, for those of you that have been around farms, is used today by farmers to start their tractors when it's cold outside. It's starting fluid. So you put ether on a cloth, stick it over a person's face, and it knocks them out. So while the surgery is going on, they're not feeling any pain, they're not awake. Sort of what Silas's mom does, except she doesn't use ether. And there wasn't as much of a science to it then as there is today. So an anesthesiologist would just drip ether over their face. If they use too much, the person goes into a coma and dies. If they don't use enough, they wake up in the middle of their surgery, which would be rather horrifying. So when Carol has to figure out how much anesthesia to give Mr. Bellamy, is it going to be the same amount that she's going to give to Victor? No, because Victor probably weighs 100 pounds less than I do. So it's going to take a different amount, maybe even a different kind of anesthesia, to keep me asleep during a surgery than it would Victor. So she got to know how big I am, how fat I am, how much I weigh. All those things are taken into account by an anesthesiologist when they put you to sleep today. But these are all the tools. Looks like something out of your tool cabinet. A surgical team was 1 doctor and 2 assistants that would hold a patient down. Even if they had used anesthesia, even if they had used ether, patients oftentimes would thrash around. Their bodies were out of control. So you have 2 assistants that basically lay on top of the patient. I'll take that job rather than being the surgeon. The assistant surgeon would hold the limb and toss it to the side when they were done. After a major battle, an amputation could take place every 15 minutes, so these guys got really good at it. There were only about 125 physicians in the Army at the beginning of the Civil War. About half of them went and fought for the Confederacy, so neither side had enough surgeons to take care of this impossible need. By the end of the war, there were over 12,000. Do you think they were well trained? Not even close. They were taking dentists who knew nothing about removing limbs and giving them a quick lesson. I'll give you guys a quick lesson here in a minute. These surgeons could be on their feet for 48 hours straight, and one estimate says that 75% of amputees never fully recovered. So here's an amputation kit. Should we amputate McKenna's arm because she has that wound that we talked about? I don't really want to amputate a leg because I don't know if you'll survive, but I'm pretty sure I can amputate Kenna's arm. Should we do it? Okay, Kenna, come up here. Really, literally, I'm not going to put you to sleep, and I promise I won't cut off your arm. Pull up your sleeve farther. Okay. First of all, does anybody know what this thing is? What's the purpose of a tourniquet? Okay, so I'm going to take this thing, and you can see it's got a screw, and I'm going to put it right here. So above the wound, here's where she's been shot. It broke both of these bones. I don't remember what they're called, but she's been shot. I put the tourniquet here and I squeeze it really hard. It cuts off the blood flow. Otherwise, there's going to be blood all over and she's going to bleed to death. Then I'm going to take one of these knives. Okay, so time out. I got to get a knife. I'm just kidding. No knives. Can you see that? I can't see it either. We can do better. Oh yeah, here, this will work. Okay, this is the bullet wound. That's where she's been shot. Now can you see it? Okay, so I'm going to take one of these knives, one of these really sharp looking ones, is maybe this long one, and I'm going to cut, so we're going to have to cut the bone somewhere up here. Maybe at the joint, but if I don't have to cut it at a joint, I don't want to, because the survival rates were actually less if we cut it at a joint, which doesn't make any sense. You'd think it would be a lot easier just to pop it out of its socket. But anyway, I want to cut it right here. This bone is crushed here, so I'm going to cut it here. So what I'm going to do is take the knife right here, because this skin is still good, and I'm going to cut all the way around close to where the wound is, wherever the skin or the flesh is still good. So I cut a circle just around the skin, and then I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to pull the skin back so all I see is muscles and ligaments and tendons. Then I'm going to take one of these other knives and I'm going to cut through the muscle above the wound, not right where the wound is, but above the wound, somewhere up here. So I've extra skin, I folded it back. I cut all the way through the muscle and all the tendons and all the arteries and all the vessels. And every time I cut through an artery or a vessel, I have to take a piece of horsehair or silk, usually horsehair because it was much more available, and I have to tie it off with a knot, because if I don't tie it off, what's going to happen when I release that tourniquet? Blood. Here's the problem. Every time I cut through one of those little suckers, a blood vessel or an artery, they're sort of like little rubber bands. As soon as I cut it, it goes ding, and it slides up here. And if I miss it and don't cut it off, she's going to bleed to death later. So this little tool right here that looks like a little teeny tiny pick, that's a vessel pick. So I take it and I reach back in there, I grab onto it and I pull it back down and I tie it shut. And I'm doing this in 15 minutes, so I don't have much time. But after I've done this so many times, I know where all the vessels and arteries are. The little teeny tiny ones don't matter because they'll just clot up anyway. But I got to get the big ones, otherwise she's going to bleed to death. Then I take the bone saw and I go, cut through it all the way, and then I throw her arm off in a pile of other arms. And now I've got a flat bone right there. But I'm not done with the surgery yet. I've got to take this tool. It looks like a pliers. It's a nipper. And I have to nip on the edges of that bone because it's flat and kind of sharp. I have to make it rounded. Why do I need to make it rounded? Yeah, because once I pull that flesh back over and suture it closed, stitch it shut, if it's sharp there, it's going to break right back through the skin. So I make a nub out of it, and then I go and pull that skin back over, and I stitch it shut, leaving a small hole for ooze and pus and blood to weep out of while she heals. You're saved. You don't have an arm. You're lucky that it was well, that's your right arm. Which is your wiping hand?
What?
Which one is your wiping hand?
Oh, which one do you want to about with?
You might wish you had your other arm amputated. She doesn't. She just uses a hamster. Look at these pics. Look at this guy. This is what Kylie would be like, except without the beard. That's an entire leg if you get shot in the femur, but he's got a fake leg. Can't be very comfortable. That guy over there, he can't even itch his nose. You know how bad that would be if you couldn't use your nose itches? You'd be like, you have to have really good friends. You're like, David, itch my nose. Or I got a booger. Left nostril. But I think we'd take care of this guy. We'd feel bad for him. Some more pics. Look at that dude, lost his whole leg up to his hip. And he's got actually his bone on display. I don't think I want to see that again. Carlos would, but I wouldn't.
That little poor guy lost both his legs, but he's got prosthetics. He's got fake legs, so he could actually stand. Technology's changed a lot. Now, this is the same guy that we saw in the picture before, except he didn't have his prosthetic arms on. How about that? Dude has a soup spoon hooked on his arm. That is awesome. So you could still eat soup even if you didn't have arms. And the other side's like a hook. I would want a hook for sure. Like a hook and a spoon. And like a pincher so I could still eat tacos. Like a taco pincher hook. Another fake leg. Basically just 2 blocks with a hinge at the knee. The sheriff here's got a fake leg. How about that guy? Now,
What's he looking at?
here's the thing. I really like this guy because he's missing his arms and his legs. And just by looking at his face, he's like, what the heck? Living life. This guy, I think the story is he lost him by frostbite. So he wasn't shot, but frostbite in your limbs is pretty common and requires amputation. How about this guy? Yeah. Ari's boyfriend here was taking mercury as a cure for like a cold, and mercury ate his face. It ate his upper jaw, so that's not normal. Civil War hospital, it looks a lot like what you might expect a military hospital to look like today, at least a battlefield hospital. There's not a whole lot of privacy, but it looks clean. And why, did your feet hurt? Pile of limbs tossed to the side? I think not. Now, if we look at here at the cause of deaths from both sides by disease, some of this stuff we've talked about. Typhoid caused by lice, 27,000 dead. I always think this is funny, but you know me, I make fun of stuff that's probably inappropriate to make fun of. Acute diarrhea, 1 million cases of acute diarrhea. First of all, there's nothing cute about diarrhea. Acute means like minor, it's going to go away. 3,000 people died from it. Chronic, 170,000 cases. Chronic means it just never stops. It doesn't go away. It'd be horrible, right? Chronic dysentery, similar. These two here are STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, pretty common during the wars. Not a lot of people died from it, but still. Scurvy, that's the lack of vitamin C. Delirium and tremens. Today, we probably, in fact, these two probably go together. We would probably say due to PTSD. Soldiers who have seen and done things on the battlefield sometimes suffer psychologically for it, and the treatments for that didn't exist at the time. And even today, we really struggle with helping soldiers who are suffering from PTSD. It's kind of a big deal. But anyway, if we look at amputations, and this is just in the Union because we don't have records for the Confederacy, 7,900 fingers amputated. Now that seems pretty easy. Like I think I could chop off one of your fingers and probably be fine. Only a 3% fatality. So 3 out of 100 people that had a finger amputated died from it. Do you think it was because of the amputation, or what do you think the cause of death was? Infection. Because here's the thing. I just got done sawing off Kenna's arm. What do you think I'd do with the tools before I move on to Kelson's arm? They're not sterilized, not like today where if a doctor uses a scalpel, most of the time the equipment that doctors use are disposable and they're going to get incinerated. They get burned into a pile of goo so that all the germs and bacteria are killed. And then they open up a new one that's completely sterile. There's no germs on it. So forearm, this is Kenna's surgery. She's got a 14% chance of dying. So within the next day or two, we'll have a pretty good idea if she's going to survive. Upper arm, 24% fatality. Toes, 6% fatality. Lower leg, 38%. Middle thigh, that's you, Kylie. There's a 54% chance you're going to die. We'll try really hard, but you're going to. This is where it gets kind of weird. Knee joint. That's at the joint. You'd think there'd be a greater chance of survival, but 58%. And hip, there were 66 people that had a hip amputation. They're cut off here. 55 of them died, so you have an 88% chance of dying if you're amputated. So what you notice here is the closer the wound is to your heart or to your core, the greater the chances are of death. So if you're going to get shot, a forearm wound is much better chance of survival than getting shot in the upper arm. And nowhere here does it say anything about body shots. So 29,900 deaths in the Civil War due to amputations. And how are we doing on time? 7 minutes? Okay, that's perfect, because I told you I'd give you a little bit of time to work on your study guide. So I will shut down now. We'll start with embalming, which is a modern process on Wednesday.